Microsoft has been a leader in AI integration since the beginning of the AI revolution. There are now dozens of branded Copilot tools across all of Microsoft's products. But it has become very clear that Microsoft has made some major mistakes in implementing AI. In this video, we're going to do a quick recap of some of the news around Microsoft and AI, and then we'll get into the three major mistakes they have made and how they impact Microsoft as a whole. At the end, I will also cover how these issues will impact .NET developers as well. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make becoming a software developer easier. While I'm a big fan of AI, I also work to ensure that you understand it in a way that will benefit your career rather than hurt it. That's why I create real-world training content, not just AI hype content. If you want to learn more, you can go to imtimcorey.com to check out my courses, including a course called Navigating AI, where I teach you how to think about AI instead of just being run over by it. Okay, so let's look at a brief overview of what has happened recently on Microsoft and how that kind of impacts us. So first off, Satya Nadella had a message to Microsoft executives: get on board with AI, the AI grind, or get out. And the idea there is that he doesn't want to miss the AI train. And that if AI is going to become the thing that changes our world, then that's a really good plan. But then in this article, he posted this, and I'll read it. I chuckle a bit every time someone sends me a note about talking to a friend at an AI startup about how differently they're working, how agile, focused, and fast they are. The reality is that this work is also happening right here at Microsoft under our noses. That sounds great, because large companies tend to be ponderous. They move slowly. They do things slowly. And sometimes startups can launch a whole lot faster. They can fail faster. They can figure things out faster. And they can come in and take over a market. And so Satya is saying here that, hey, no, we're doing the same thing at Microsoft. We are moving fast. We're being agile. We're doing all these different things. That's actually a bad thing in my mind. And here's why. There's a reason why large companies move slowly, and it's not just because they have to. It's because they really need to think about how these things impact more than just the little area they're working with. If you have no customers, you can change things every day, and it's not a problem. When you have millions of customers, you can't just change things every day and have no impact. There's a major impact to that. And I think we're seeing that inside of Microsoft. If you've worked with Copilot, and we're going to use just Copilot here as the name because there's Copilot for everything, right? And we're going to kind of exclude GitHub Copilot. That's actually one of the better Copilots out there. But let's exclude that one from it, and let's think about the Microsoft Copilot, the Office Copilot, and so on. If you've used multiple of those, you will know that they all behave a little bit differently. In fact, the controls aren't the same. The way they're laid out isn't the same necessarily. And their level of intelligence isn't the same. Why? Because multiple teams are working on them independently, and so they come out with different results. And when there's all this change that happens very, very quickly, what also happens? A lot of things break. So moving fast is not necessarily a good thing when it comes to a large company like Microsoft. For a startup, absolutely. But a startup doesn't have millions of customers. And once it does, it has to start slowing down, because otherwise it causes major disruptions with all of their customers. Okay, next up, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella really wants you to stop calling AI slop in 2026. This raised a whole bunch of headlines, and it created a whole bunch of memes, which I found quite hilarious, including a number of memes around micro slop as kind of a backlash, because people are frustrated with Microsoft saying, no, you don't understand. No, you don't understand to the customers using their own products. They're saying, you don't understand, this is better for you, but we're the ones using it and not liking it. So this quote here about we're beginning to distinguish between a spectacle and substance, That right there stood out to me because we're beginning to distinguish, but you've been integrating AI into Windows and Office and all these other products for years now. So you hadn't distinguished between spectacle and substance yet, and yet you've been pushing on this on us for years. That's frustrating. And he didn't say we have now understood the difference. He said we're beginning to understand the difference. And yet they're pushing harder and harder to put more and more AI into their products. This is a bit frustrating. So yes, that backlash I think is deserved, but it also highlights something, which is there's a disconnect between what Microsoft says we want and what we actually want. Let's look at this next post. This one caused a whole bunch of uproar online. This is Galen Hunt. He works at Microsoft in the research department, and he was hiring someone. And this post is the original post plus an update. I'm going to highlight some key things out of this in order of original post first and then the update. So in the original post, he's hiring someone as a principal software engineer for an in-house job at Redmond, Washington. And what he's looking for, he said, my goal is to eliminate every line of C and C++ code from Microsoft by 2030. It is 2026 right now. So that's 4 years from now. His goal is to have no more C code, no more C++ code in all of Microsoft. Now, what's one of the major things written in C and C++ code? Windows. That's what Windows was written in. So that caused a big firestorm in the media. Now, the next thing is his North Star is one engineer, 1 month, 1 million lines of code. Which means that in 1 month, one person is supposed to create and review 1 million lines of code. That's physically impossible, which means the only way that one engineer can do that is if the code is not reviewed, which I have seen multiple Microsoft people say is kind of the thing, right? Like, you can't necessarily read all the code that AI writes. You just have to understand that it's going to write some code that you don't understand or that maybe you haven't looked over yourself. That is not what we want for a foundational tool to be built upon. This is not what we want that's going to be securing our data, that's going to be protecting all of our information, that's going to be running without problems. This goal right here is terrifying. Now, this is a goal. This is a research department. This is not, Microsoft is doing this right now. That's not what they're doing. This is research, but this is their goal. Now, next up, they want to enable translating Microsoft's largest C and C++ systems to Rust. Okay, so Rust is the new hotness, and it does have some improvements over base C and C++ code. And so his goal is to enable translating Microsoft's largest systems that are in C and C++ to Rust. So his original goal is to eliminate every line of C and C++. And then down below, he's saying the largest systems will go to Rust. Okay, so that was the original post. Now let's talk about the update, where he says there's been some speculative reading between the lines. Okay, so let's talk about what that speculative reading between the lines might be. Windows is not being rewritten in Rust with AI. I'm not sure where that is speculative or reading between the lines, because his goal is to eliminate every line of C and C++ in 4 years. Well, Windows is written in C and C++. So either his goal is incorrect, meaning will not really every line of C and C++, or his statement here that Windows is not being rewritten means that he can't accomplish his goal. So which is it? Either his goal is wrong or he can't accomplish his goal. And then he didn't want to imply that Rust is the endpoint, meaning that they're going to transition from C and C++ to Rust. It was just, that's one of the first languages that you might think about. The problem is they're hiring someone who is good at Rust at the operating system level, at the compiler level, etc., to work at replacing all lines of C and C++ code. So this update seemed to be more damage control than it was actually re-understanding the original post. Because the original post is quite clear. There was no reading between the lines. Either his goals are incorrect or his update is incorrect. That's the only really two ways you can read this post. So this caused a bit of a firestorm. Now, to be clear, this is one engineer who's working at Microsoft in a research capacity. Researchers often research things that are well beyond the realm of current possibility. They do things that might not ever happen. And that's something you have to expect, is that research does things that are crazy and out there. And if you've ever seen concept cars, you don't see those on the road in 2 years because they're just working on concepts and showing off what could be done and trying things out. Well, that's what research can do as well. But there's some really strange goals here for a research department. He does not set the vision for Microsoft. This is not coming from the top necessarily. At least he's saying it's not. But this definitely caused some major issues in the community. Next up, Microsoft's attempt to sell AI agents are turning into a disaster. So Carnegie Mellon found earlier this year that even the best performing agents failed to complete 70% of real-world Office tasks, or failed to complete them 70% of the time. The ChatGPT agent that was released that can do work for you, users found it to be lackluster, calling it not very useful and slow. So because of this, seemingly, there was a report came out that said that Microsoft was cutting their quotas by up to 50% for sales of their AI products. Now, Microsoft has pushed back against this and said, well, you don't understand the difference between sales goals and et cetera. So they, of course, deny this. And why wouldn't they? Because even if it was true, then you don't want that out in the public. And if it's not true, of course, you're going to say the same thing as if it was true. But this does kind of highlight the idea that there's a disconnect between what people want and what Microsoft is selling. Next up, 2025 has been a disaster for Windows 11 as frustrating bugs and intrusive features continue to erode the trust of Microsoft's flagship operating system. Something desperately needs to change. That's a great headline. I think that really highlights what's been going on recently with Windows. So, too many bugs, too many changes, too little control. There's been a lot of things going on with Microsoft Windows that people don't like, and these features come in and they don't even work. And so we've had more and more problems, more and more things go wrong. Now, with that, this is what kind of set up a firestorm here, is that earlier this past year in April, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, said that as much as 30% of Microsoft's code has been written by AI. As much as 30%. And that was back in April, and they're pushing for even more AI adoption internally. So when you look at this idea of it's been a disastrous year for Windows 11, and then you look back at April where the CEO is saying 30% of all code is written by AI, you start to put some pieces together. Now, is this saying that AI is writing all of these bugs? No, it's not. But what Microsoft is pushing is that AI makes you a better developer. It makes you a faster developer. It writes better code than you do. It can be relied upon even when you're not watching it. Those are the things that Microsoft is pushing. And yet, they've had a disastrous year for their code. And in fact, Microsoft has finally admitted that almost all major Windows 11 core features are broken. So this came out in December. So November, December, somewhere around there. So April, he said that 30% of all the code Microsoft is being written by AI, then in November, the winter timeframe, it turns out they admit, yeah, almost all of our core features are broken. Well, even if you say, well, that's not AI's fault, and I can grant you that probably isn't all AI's fault, but if AI really is revolutionary, and Microsoft's internal tooling should be the best because they're the most cutting edge, they have the latest and greatest stuff, they have an internal pipeline to OpenAI and everything that comes from there, plus their own tooling. So if AI really is benefiting developers, if it's making developers faster, if it's reducing the need for developers because it's writing code well, then why is it that the operating system for Windows is falling apart? You can't have massive improvements in AI and massive uptick in developer abilities because of AI and have a major fall off in code quality at a production level. You can't have both. Either AI makes your code better or it doesn't. And Microsoft is saying one thing and they're showing us something different. So that's kind of the overview of where we're at with Microsoft right now and the story around AI at Microsoft. So let's start talking about the major mistakes that I see Microsoft has made recently, and we're going to kind of categorize them. So each mistake will be a category of mistakes. Mistake number one is in the category of safety and security. AI through Microsoft is causing some major issues with safety and security. The first one is internal code reviews are slipping. We talked about the fact that Microsoft's every major system in Microsoft seems to be broken, and that's what they admit. Well, that means that code reviews at least are slipping. They're not being as effective at catching bugs. They're causing more issues than they're finding. And they're causing a lot more problems so that all of this move fast and add AI to more things isn't helping their safety and security of the operating system. It's causing more flaws and more issues. There was a thing, we'll talk more about this later with performance as well, but there was an issue where they kind of admitted that File Explorer in Windows is very, very slow, ridiculously slow. And their goal was, we're going to cut that the speed deficit in half, which is still very, very slow. And they tried, and it hasn't really. What they did basically is just took more memory and used more of your performance of your computer to try and preload File Explorer. Well, that doesn't make your computer better. It just makes things slower. And it takes up more of your memory, which is getting more and more expensive every day. So these internal code reviews aren't being helpful. AI is not making the code of Windows more secure, or the code of Office more secure, or more safe, or more performant. It's causing more flaws. And because of this, there's also other issues on the client side. The first one is prompt injection dangers. So Microsoft is pushing Copilot everywhere. There was a whole big furor over the fact you go to office.com and it's basically just a Copilot page. And Microsoft had to kind of push back and say, no, we're not renaming Office Copilot. We're just making Copilot the centerpiece of Office, which is what's happening. Every time you go to office.com, you actually get Copilot. But the idea was, hey, you probably want Copilot first. And that's their mentality behind it everywhere. If you open up Notepad now, you have a Copilot button. Because why wouldn't you want Copilot in a thing that's supposed to be just a simple text editor? But the problem is that more and more they're saying, hey, well, in order to make Copilot valuable, it has to be able to do something. It can't just be a chatbot in one more spot. We don't need 30 chatbot installations on a typical Windows computer. So it has to be able to do something. If it's Office, It has to be able to create documents, modify documents. It has to be able to change formatting. If it's Windows, we have to be able to say, hey, I want to do this and have it do it. The problem is that the more power Copilot has, the more danger it incurs. In fact, Microsoft released a warning, not that necessarily it will get out as far as Copilot does, but they released a warning saying, hey, be very careful what permissions you give Copilot. Because if you tell it you can modify files on the computer, it might modify files in a way that you weren't expecting. If you say, hey, I want you to be able to work with the control panel and change settings, it might change settings that you weren't expecting. And so they've issued a warning saying, hey, there might be a problem here. And this is where prompt injection comes in, where if you open up a Word document from someone else, it might have a white-on-white hidden prompt injection, or a PDF, or an Excel file, or any other type of file. They might have hidden prompt injections that kind of override what Copilot does and says, hey, do this too. Maybe open up a security flaw here, or send this document somewhere else, or go to this website and do this. That is a real danger, and it's one that Microsoft has admitted they can't protect you against. That's a big deal. So the more power you give Copilot, the more valuable it is, and yet also the more danger it is to your system. So do you want more power? Then you want more danger too. That's not a great trade-off, and Microsoft still has not figured out what to do about that. They know it's a problem. They know that there's an issue, but they don't know how to resolve those two, except to say, hey, well, we need to make sure that you read all the messages Copilot says and that you approve everything it does. The problem is the more you teach users to say next, 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 the more they're going to not see that one prompt. And this comes back to what I've been telling developers all along, which is you need to know how to write the code in order to tell Copilot or Claude or anybody else what to do to write the code. Because if it comes back with code you don't understand, then you don't know when there's a problem. You don't know what you don't know. Well, if a user doesn't know if something's a bad thing on their operating system, they're going to trust the source of truth. And they think the source of truth is Copilot, because it tries to be that source of truth and it talks like it's the source of truth. So prompt injection is a massive security issue. But with that is hallucinations as admin. Again, maybe you don't have a prompt injection issue. Maybe you're not opening a document that has a secret prompt on it. Maybe you're not, getting a prompt from somewhere else, or having an audio play in the background that injects a prompt into your Copilot, which, yes, can happen. We've had problems with that. But hallucinations are still a major issue, where in the software development world, we've seen it where the system will say, oops, yeah, I did delete your database, or I did drop that database. I thought that, I should do this, and I was wrong. Well, but it's too late. You dropped the database. Well, what happens when the Copilot has access to, let's say, your Word documents or your PowerPoint? I have done this. I have replicated this, where I gave it access and then it did things that I could not undo. The only way I could undo it was to use OneDrive and use a previous version, something that users don't typically know how to do. So hallucinations can cause massive, irreversible damage. That's a big issue. And the more power you give Copilot in order to have it be valuable, the more hallucinations can hurt you. Now, with that, there's also data leakage concerns. When you use an AI, and it's going to be either it's dumb, it doesn't know anything about your system, doesn't know anything about your files, doesn't know anything about your processes, doesn't know about you, and so it's not useful, or It knows about your files. It knows who you are. It can read your emails, etc., which can make it more useful. But then you start to have to wonder, is that sending data back to the company? Is that using my information for training data? And the answer might be yes. You don't know. And so there's a lot of concerns over, is my data being leaked to Microsoft? Microsoft Recall was this feature they thought was going to be awesome, where it takes screenshots of every activity you do. Don't worry, it's going to lock those down. Well, it doesn't actually lock them down that well. And it said, well, but we're going to make sure that we protect you against, screenshotting certain things, but it hasn't know all the sensitive things that I'm going through. If I'm on a site and I, have talk about my medical issues in a text document, is it going to screenshot that? Is now my medical issues part of the recall? Well, yes, it will be. And that can be OCR'd to get that text off. And all of a sudden, now my medical issues are part of the data that it can read. And why would you even want to have something like recall? Well, the users really don't. There's not a good reason to use recall. Yes, there's small edge cases where maybe you could go back and look at what a screenshot of what you're doing and figure out what was happening. But for the most part, the reason why it might be valuable is if you were training an AI. And that's a problem because that's data leakage. That's my data now being used as a training set, which I don't authorize. And yet Microsoft is pushing it on us, where they held off for a while in recall, but now they're starting to push it again. And yet the customers are saying no, but Microsoft is saying, too bad. You can turn it off, but it's coming. And they'll say, well, we're going to make it turn on by default, but then there's sometimes it will be on by default. And they're creating a mess. They're creating a mess of security issues that make users uncomfortable for a good reason. And even the more that the users understand, the less comfortable they get, because Microsoft and AI in general are looking at our information and using our information as training information. Whether it goes to a central server or not, that's concerning. There's a lot of safety and security issues around AI that Microsoft has frankly said, we don't know how to solve. And that's been years. They said that, and they haven't come up with a solution. They just kind of shrugged their shoulders. That's not a great issue, a great idea. And so that's why this is in mistake number one, safety and security. There's some major issues going on at Microsoft that are causing some real problems for users. Mistake number two is perception. So there is a negative perception around AI, especially Copilot, and Microsoft. Let's talk about why. Well, Copilot does not work reliably. If you've used Copilot, you may have had a great experience. Your neighbor may hate Copilot. And you may say, well, why would you hate Copilot? It works great for me. And you look at your scenario, it might work fine for your scenario most of the time. And then you look at your neighbor's scenario and go, oh, well, that should work, but it doesn't. And so then this whole debate goes on about, well, you didn't talk to it right. You didn't prompt it right. Well, you didn't create the right, files to help it work better. But the reality is, even what works today won't necessarily work tomorrow because of the underlying structural changes to the LLMs powering Copilot. Copilot does not work reliably. Also, not every Copilot is going to have the same power and capabilities, and they're built differently. So when one might work pretty well, another might work horribly. I keep trying to make the Office Copilot work. I keep hoping that someday it might be useful because the dream of what AI can do is awesome. If I could talk to an AI and say, hey, I don't want to go through the slog of creating this whole PowerPoint. Can you create the most of it for me based upon my outline? And then I'll go in and just tweak things. That would be awesome. I work with PowerPoints that are in the hundreds of slides sometimes. When I create a course, I'll create a PowerPoint for that course and then only have a slide or two per lesson or per section. But that adds up over time. So recently, I opened up PowerPoint. I was working on the slides, and I was at 108 slides, I believe, 107, 108, somewhere around there. And I was on slide 102, I believe, at the time. And I saw that PowerPoint, the Copilot button, which, by the way, there's a Copilot button plus there's a button in the ribbon as well, because why wouldn't you have two different places to activate Copilot? That's the other thing, is they're pushing Copilot so hard, they're putting multiple buttons in the same application. But at this time, I open it up, and the first thing I do is I kind of give it a baseline assessment, because one of the things that Copilot is supposed to be good at is summarizing a PowerPoint, to read over the PowerPoint and give you the highlights. And that's really useful, especially if you got a Copilot or a PowerPoint from a presentation or somewhere else that you didn't attend, and you want to get the highlights rather than reading through 100 slides or whatever. So I asked it first, how many slides are in this document? So this current document, how many slides are there? And it said 104, and there was 108. And I said, no, there's 108. And it said, no, there's 104. And I replicated this more than once. And so I went back and said, no, there's 108. I can see that there's 108. And it said, oh, well, yeah, maybe there's 108, but I can't see those last 4 slides because there's no text content on them. They must just be images. And I knew that wasn't correct, but at the same time, I'm starting to be gaslit by the AI, who's very confidently telling me that, well, maybe those other slides do exist, but there's no real content in them, so there's no reason for me to even know about them. Why you wouldn't know about them, I don't know, because some slides do have images. You should still know about those. So I went to slide 107, I believe it was, and I clicked on it, and sure enough, that was text. And I went back to the AI and said, with my cursor now on slide 107, I said, yes, there are 108 slides, and they do have text. And I said, oh, I can now see that. Well, wait a minute. If you're going to summarize something for me, and I have to argue over and over and go to the slides in order for you to even see that there's text in the slides, then how can I rely on you to summarize? So what's my perception of Copilot? My perception is Copilot is dumb. Copilot shouldn't be relied upon. Copilot is not something that can give me reliable information, which means, do I think that I should use Copilot in, say, Windows, or Copilot in SQL Server, or in Azure? Absolutely not. So it doesn't work reliably. There's a GIF going around recently of a person who went to the system menu in Windows, and it gave in the search bar, it gave a prompt, and it said, hey, use this prompt. It was something like something about your mouse pointer. And my mouse pointer is too small, I think. And so they typed in, my mouse pointer is too small, the example prompt in the search bar, and it doesn't work. So what is users' perception of Copilot? It doesn't work reliably. That's frustrating. But then Copilot is everywhere. Everywhere. So Microsoft has a tool, because it's seen as one tool, Copilot. They've named it Copilot. And yet it's actually Office Copilot and Windows Copilot and a whole bunch of different Copilots, dozens of them. But yet, because it's called Copilot, everybody thinks it's the same tool. And it's everywhere. And based upon point number 1, it doesn't work reliably. So now this thing is everywhere doesn't work. Even though I've only tried it in a few areas, it doesn't work anywhere because I've tried it in a few areas and it's the same name. So same name, different results even, which is frustrating. But the problem is that when you put something everywhere that doesn't work reliably, that you've named the same thing but has different levels of ability, that causes massive frustration. There was an issue recently where LG TVs had a force push of Copilot, where people found out there's now Copilot on their TV. And that's frustrating because they know that Copilot doesn't work. And why does your TV need Copilot to begin with? Now, in theory, you might use an AI or an LLM actually to do things like when you talk to it to have it translate into actual commands, if it worked. The problem was that this push wasn't some type of embedded AI system that would help make, talking to your remote instead of having to, tab through menus easier. No, this was just a link to the web version of Copilot forced on the user. So what's the perception? The perception is that Microsoft is going to shove Copilot down your throat, a thing that doesn't work, that's not reliable. They're going to put it everywhere they can, regardless of how you feel about it. That's a major perception issue. So finally, it feels like we are the product. Because what's the point? What's the point of putting Copilot on an LG TV? What's the point of putting Copilot in a menu when it doesn't work? What's the point of putting Copilot twice into PowerPoint when it doesn't work reliably? What is the point of having Copilot in every single product that Microsoft creates? Especially when we're not paying for it. The general version of Copilot is free. If you're not paying for something, more often than not, you're the product. And that's what it feels like. It feels like putting Copilot everywhere is sucking up our information. The next level of understanding who we are in order to sell us ads. It feels like it's more of a spyware tool than it is a help to the users, especially when the users are saying, I don't want this. And Microsoft is saying, too bad, it's coming anyway. That's a major perception issue. So it feels like we are the product. We are the thing that's being sold. That's mistake number 2, is the perception around AI. Mistake number 3 is the vision of AI. So it feels like Microsoft is focused only on AI features. This comes out a lot. When you attend a conference of Microsoft's, when you hear the CEO talk about new features or what's coming up, it's always AI. In fact, if you took out every session at a conference, every conversation that the CEO has, remove all the ones where AI is mentioned, you might not have any. And that feels like the only thing Microsoft is focused on is AI. And yet, as we have seen in mistake number 2, the perception is that Copilot doesn't work. So the focus is on Copilot because, let's be honest here, Copilot and AI are the same thing at Microsoft. If the focus is on Copilot and yet Copilot doesn't work, then the focus of AI, the future of Microsoft, is on things that users don't want, that feels like they're spying on them, that doesn't work to give the users any meaningful benefits. Now, again, different Copilots can have different benefits, and sometimes they do work, and sometimes it does provide value. But overall, it feels like it's not that great of value compared to all the problems it causes. So a focus only on AI features is a very problematic future for Microsoft. It feels like we're going to get less and less value, and we're going to have more and more problems. Going back to the problems that we have with, Microsoft saying that every major feature is broken, that they have major issues inside of pretty much everything they do, and yet they're saying that 30% of their code is written by AI, and probably more now, and that if you're not on the AI train, then you better get off out of the company. That feels like we're going into a darker and darker time with Microsoft because of the actual end results we've been seeing. Now, they're also implementing poorly performing replacements for things. So in Windows, there is a agenda view. There used to be an agenda view where it would show you, hey, here's the things that are coming up in your day based upon your calendar. Well, when Microsoft transitioned over to the web view-based Office products, that agenda view went away. They're bringing it back. Only they're bringing back a web view of the agenda view, which is not a good performing tool. It will have less performance than the original agenda view. So we're getting the same thing we used to have, just slower, and it's going to take up more memory. That doesn't feel good. So when they talk about fixing File Explorer, they talk about, we're going to try and add performance. There was a recent reviewer, I forget where it was, but they reviewed, I think, Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 8.1, all the way up through Windows 11. They reviewed the performance of File Explorer and found that Windows 8.1 had the best performance for File Explorer. So we're going the wrong direction with performance, and they're trying to tell us, well, we're going to make it better. But you haven't. You've made it worse and worse and worse. So we're getting poor performing replacements for current products. So they're also making the tools worse. They're making things worse because they don't have a good vision for what they want the tools to be. The one that makes me very mad, it makes me furious how they're changing it to the point where I am thinking about creating my own replacement, is Notepad. Notepad is supposed to be a simple text editor. It has been that way for a very long time. They have added some new features that I've liked. For example, they have a dark mode. I like that. I use Notepad a lot for quick notes. I have dozens of text documents all over the place, and that may just be me. But Notepad is a way to do quick text with a very fast performing application. You click on it, it's already open. There's no waiting for things because it does one thing well. And yes, like I said, dark mode, I like dark mode. I don't like to be, have this white square on my screen. So dark mode, I like that. Having tabs, I actually like that. And having those tabs save, even when I haven't actually saved a document, super helpful. So there are good things being added in Notepad, but then they said, well, hey, let's add Markdown. And let's be able to do tables in Notepad. And let's add Copilot. Why? Why are we doing this? Remember, perception of Copilot is it's junk. And you're adding it to Notepad, which will slow it down. And now you're adding features to Notepad that, by the way, were features of WordPad, which used to exist and Microsoft killed. So why are we making Notepad into WordPad? When they also have Word. I could use Word. I could use VS Code. I don't have to use Notepad. Notepad had a purpose, and now they're kind of corrupting it. The vision for what these tools should be is getting worse. And Notepad isn't the only one. They're making a lot of tools worse. At least that's how it feels. So the vision doesn't look like they have a great vision for what tooling should be, what new features we want. It does not feel like they are looking at the customer and saying, what does the customer want? It feels like what they're doing is looking at the products and saying, how can we put Copilot into more things, regardless of how the customer feels? So it's making tools worse. And again, finally, they aren't listening to customers. That's the vision. The vision isn't to listen to customers. It does not come across that way. They may say, yes, we do surveys. We look at how things are used. It does not feel that way because how the response isn't better tooling. It isn't things that people are praising. The very fact that Microsoft had to come out and say, we want you to stop talking about slop means that there's a problem. And it's not that it's the people. Because you don't have to tell people to stop disparaging something that's good. You have to tell people to stop disparaging something that's not good. And it feels like they're not listening to their customers. Instead, they're saying, you know what? We're going to tell you how it is. So it feels like mistake number 3 is they've got a very bad vision. So what's Microsoft's future? And we're going to speculate here because, of course, the future is not set. And there may be things that radically change. But let's talk short-term future. I'm not talking 5 and 10 years down that road. I'm talking this year. Let's talk about Microsoft's future. So I think there'll be more instability, not less. Microsoft does not seem to be turning a corner where they're saying, hey, we've now really figured out how to use this AI, and now it's starting to make our code even better and more rock solid. And we're putting out better tooling. It feels like what they're doing is saying, oh yeah, we put out another update and that broke more stuff. So it feels like we are not improving, but actually causing more and more problems. I think the instability will continue. I think we're going to see more intrusive ads. OpenAI recently announced they're going to put ads in their free tier of ChatGPT. If you don't know, ChatGPT and OpenAI in general is really tied with Microsoft. Microsoft has a very close connection with them. They've been a heavy investor and they've had the ability to access their tools and technologies. And so there's a lot of overlap there. But with the free tool of ChatGPT, OpenAI is saying, hey, we can't afford to run this. We've got to start paying the bill somehow. And so we'll put ads in. Even though a year ago in 2024, the Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, said that ads were the last resort, which would seem to indicate that they're at the point of last resort. So what they're doing is putting more intrusive ads into ChatGPT, or putting ads into ChatGPT, because of the fact that it's not free to run these servers. And they're not making the money they need to in order to pay the bills. That's been a known issue for a long time now. And they don't have major revenue streams they're adding. So this is going to have to be a revenue stream they add. Well, in the same way, Microsoft is putting Copilot in everything. So here are the two scenarios. Either no one uses it, and so it doesn't cost Microsoft much, or everyone uses it like Microsoft seems to want, and all of a sudden it costs Microsoft a lot of money. Because I don't anticipate people are going to pay $10, $20 per ChatGPT or per Copilot. Because remember, Copilots are different. It's not one Copilot. I don't anticipate they're going to pay a subscription per Copilot. So maybe there's an overall Copilot subscription that comes out, but right now you don't just, the average user doesn't pay for Copilot. And so if they use it a lot, what has to happen? You have to get revenue somehow, which means ads. And you might say, well, Microsoft would never, except for the fact that Microsoft already has ads in their operating system. There's pop-ups for OneDrive, there's pop-ups for other tools, there's banners, there's other things to try and get you to buy, in so far, Microsoft products, but trying to get you to utilize or buy Microsoft products. And those are ads. Well, it's only going to get worse, I think, if Copilot succeeds. If it fails, well, then there's not a need for ads because no one's using it. Next up, I think that's going to be a shrinking customer base, not just in Copilot, but in Windows in general. There's always a talk about this is the year of Linux, but more and more, I'm seeing that there's a more significant move towards Linux. Now, we're not talking about Microsoft losing massive market share. I don't think that's the case yet. There are customers, major customers, that are switching off of Windows to Linux, but I do think that the growth of Linux will be, a few percentage points this year, which is actually a really significant amount. So I think that there will be a shrinkage of usage of Windows for people who can. And right now, that's more techie people than it is the average everyday user, just because they don't know how to switch. But as more vendors might come on board to say, hey, we'll give you a pre-built PC with a version of Linux that works well, that might cause a bigger shift. And if the perception of Copilot, the perception of Microsoft and how they use AI and how they potentially might be spying on their own customers, as that perception, whether it's true or not, grows, I think there's going to be more and more of a push towards alternatives. And that might be Mac for some people, and it might be Linux for others. Again, I don't think Microsoft's going to lose their overall position as the number one operating system, but at least not for consumers, but I do think that it is going to shrink. And then I think there's going to be some long-term brand damage. Back in the 90s, Microsoft was known as the big evil corporation. So when the browser wars were happening, Microsoft used its position to suppress other browsers. They really tried hard to kill Mozilla or Netscape, and they tried hard to make Internet Explorer the only browser to use. And they tried to use their leverage to force people into their ecosystem and then to get in that walled garden and stay there. And they did that through coercion instead of through added value. Mac later went the other way and said, hey, let's give you added value. If you buy a Mac and an iPhone, they work together seamlessly. And if you buy a time capsule, that works too. And that was a much better story. But for Microsoft, they did it through force. And that caused some real brand damage that still ripples to this day. You still see the $M references around. And that comes from the era of Microsoft being this big, bad, evil company. And they did turn a corner where they started to open source their tooling and their systems so that there would be more of a player in the community that played well with others. They are a massive contributor to Git and helping the community in general when it comes to Git and to other open source initiatives, not just Microsoft initiatives. And they have worked very hard to kind of reverse that image, and they've done a good job. But in this area, it feels like they're going the opposite direction again. And that can cause some significant long-term damage to the brand. So that's where I see Microsoft going. It's not a rosy picture. It's not a picture where it's like, well, yeah, but there's some good things too. I don't see a whole lot of good things. I see a lot of bad things. I'm not saying everything is awful. There are some things that are valuable in Copilot. And again, I've kind of excluded GitHub Copilot from this. GitHub is Microsoft and all the rest because of the fact that GitHub Copilot is a pretty decent product in most cases. And one of the things I have to make sure we are very clear on is Microsoft is a massive company. It is not homogeneous. It is not one thing. There are great things coming out of Microsoft that does not, if Microsoft overall has brand damage, if it overall has a shrinking customer base, if overall it's causing some major problems, that doesn't mean that every product is too. There's a lot of valuable things. I think that VS Code is a great product. And I think that TypeScript is a great language. And I think that C# is a great language. I think there's a lot of things they're doing around their systems that are good. But overall, this is where I see Microsoft going. So let's talk to .NET developer and .NET's future, because I'm a .NET developer and I teach .NET, and sometimes you look at Microsoft and say, oh no, Microsoft's causing major problems. Maybe I should not learn C#. Maybe I should stop learning C#. Maybe I should go away from it because Microsoft is doing bad things. I think that we need to talk about .NET's future. So I think long-term, things still look great. Things still look very good. There are some good things happening in .NET. I think that there are some improvements that are happening. I think that they are continuing to embrace the idea of looking at what, as a whole, the industry is doing and then adopting those same industry standards instead of trying to make their own standards. I think that's a good thing. I think they're trying to work outside of just the .NET sphere, meaning work with other languages and integrate well. I think that's a very good thing. So I think that the future for .NET long-term still looks good. So as a C# developer, I would not say go away from it. If you're thinking about C#, it's still a great language to learn. I think it still has a great future. I think one of the things that really helped is that they invested heavily in .NET Core, which became .NET, in cross-platform. I think this is going to pay dividends right now. Because you might say, I don't want to be on Windows. I don't want to spy on my Copilot. I don't want to deal with the updates that cause more and more problems on my operating system. No problem. Work on Linux. You can still use .NET. You can still develop in .NET. You can still be a great .NET developer. even though you're not on Windows. So I think the cross-platform story is paying off right now. I think it's going to really help .NET developers. If C# was only a Windows product, that would be more scary. Because if as more and more of your customers go away from Windows, all of a sudden you're left with, what do I do? Because I have a shrinking market because of Microsoft. But with the fact that you can target all of your customers, because it doesn't matter if they're on Windows or Mac or Linux, you can target them. You can build apps for them. You can build web apps for them. You can build desktop apps with third-party tools like Avalonia or Uno. You can work with pretty much any platform now with .NET without having to lose customers because they move around between operating systems. So the cross-platform story really is paying off. And their open source initiatives are important. And I think this is one of the areas where we need to keep an eye on things, where we need to make sure that they continue to push to do things open source, that they are continuing to work with the community and continuing to be open and transparent, but also allowing for the idea that they are not the only thing in town, that they are helping the community, but they're not taking over the community. So they're not just locking things down and putting up walled gardens that lock you into a certain ecosystem or a certain way of doing things. So their open source initiatives are important, and they're continuing to move forward on those. So I think that's really a good sign. And then, again, I just want to reiterate this, different teams are different. Even inside of .NET, when you think about, well, but how does this work compared to that? Well, that team may be poor, or it may not be functioning well, or they may have different priorities than this team over here. So make sure that when you are thinking about these issues and thinking about how AI is affecting you or Copilot is affecting you, make sure you realize that there's more than just that in Microsoft. It's not just one homogeneous mix of developers. They don't have just thousands of developers. They're all working on the same team. They have different teams that respond differently, that work different ways, that have different goals, that have different ideas about, is open source good or not? And I think that in .NET, the .NET sphere, a lot of the teams, if not all of them, are really good about thinking about the community, thinking about how to integrate beyond just C# or beyond just .NET into the larger ecosystem, and thinking about how to serve their customers best. And I think that's very valuable. So at the end of the day, what can we say about this whole story? Well, I think that we need to look at the way Microsoft is working with Copilot and really take a step back, evaluate it, and say, you know what? This is what I like. This is what I don't like. I think we need to not use it where it's not valuable and kind of call Microsoft out when it's appropriate. That's one of the things this video does. But I think we need to make sure that we don't just accept the status quo, but also realize that things won't be this way forever. Now, the AI people who are really enthusiastic or optimistic about AI will tell you that it's getting better every day. And that's true, but it's been years. We've heard that for years. For years, they've said the next model, the next LLM model will be the one. And it hasn't been. It's still not the one. And there's a lot of things we've seen that go beyond just a better model. So yes, there's major problems. Yes, I think Microsoft has made some massive mistakes. I think the areas we talked about today are really important. And I think that we need to hold them accountable with that. And we need to continue to monitor that. But there's two things that could happen. One, the AI bubble could burst. Now, yes, there is a bubble, and we've talked about it before, and we'll talk again about it. A bubble does not mean that AI goes away. That's not what a bubble means. And again, I've got a previous video on that you should watch. But if the bubble bursts and a lot of the peripheral things go away and things shrink down and things become more about one or two market leaders and the idea that you have to make more money than things cost, I think we'll see a shrinkage in how much AI is pushed because it won't be practical. And so I think that'd be a good thing. I think we should hope for that. I think that we'll get more practical results, things that actually work better for the consumer. But the other thing that could happen is we could continue to just grow and push, and Microsoft's going to push into more and more areas and make it more and more intrusive to try to get you to use it. And that's going to mean that we need to investigate alternatives. And in fact, that's one of the things that I am doing personally. So I guess the end of the conclusion of this video is some bad things are happening. I think we need to call Microsoft out on it. And I think that at the end of the day, we need to make the choice that's right for us moving forward. But as a .NET developer, I'm not upset. I don't think that this impacts .NET hardly at all, if at all. Even the Copilot integrations that are in .NET seem to work pretty well. So I think that we can be happy about that. All right. Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.